So it's really exciting to be here today and kicking this conversation off. I want to ask you a question about something that every person in this room did today. Put on pants. No, everybody in this room did something. You showed up. It means everybody here came in some mode of transportation. Everybody here walked up that long parking lot. That long parking lot, it's uphill. You dodged most of the goose poop as you walked up to that front door. Came into that little foyer, people started saying hi to you. Walked in that sweet gangway of a lobby we've got. You came in, you took a chair, and I want to ask you, first of all, I just want to say thanks. Some of you are here for the very first time. You're here because a friend invited you. You're here because you're trying out at church. You're here because you haven't been here in a really long time. Man, it means so much to us that you're here today. Thank you. Other people, you're here. This is your Sunday hangout. You don't even have to decide. You just know, tomorrow morning we're going to be in church. Listen, your faithfulness is what makes this feel like a family. When you lean into relationships like that and you make it a priority. So thank you. Everybody's here. Thank you. Now I want to ask you a question. How many of us can relate to this? It's kind of a pressure that we carry into places like this, that when somebody sees you and they lock eyes with you, or maybe they stick their hand out, and they say, "How you doing?" You say, "I'm fine. I'm good." Sometimes it's this knee-jerk reaction. Other times it's this purposely planned response, no matter how you actually are feeling. True or false? Like, doesn't matter how your week went. Doesn't matter how your life is going right now. You got to say it. "I'm good. I'm good. How are you?" It's like one word for us. "I'm good. How are you?" Flip. Judo. Wow. Isn't that crazy about us? Like, doesn't matter if you got into your work email 2 hours ago and you already got deep into that work stress and you're like, I just can't wait for Monday to start so I can start cutting this pile down again. Doesn't matter if that person in your family who routinely makes everybody late did it again. Doesn't matter how you feel about that. Doesn't matter that there was not one but 2 death threats issued in the minivan on the way to church today. Doesn't matter. How you doing? "I'm good. I'm great." And plus, this is church, so it's not just good and great. It's like, I'm blessed. Hashtag blessed. Too blessed to be stressed. If I was more blessed, there'd be 2 of me. And you're like, all right, I've been here all morning. I haven't seen anybody do that yet except you. All right, so maybe nobody's doing that. That's just me. But listen, when it comes to our emotions, often, the reality is often we'll give a spiritual sounding answer at the expense of giving an honest answer, right? Kind of the way we work over the next few weeks. That's why we want to have some great conversations on how to navigate our emotions in an honest way, in a healthy way, in a way that honors God and leads us closer and closer to his deepening purposes in our lives. And I realize that some of us, as soon as we hear that we're going to be in a whole series talking about our emotions, you don't know how you feel about that. But you know how you feel when you talk about your emotions, and you don't like it very much. And I get that. I really do. But I'm also going to tell you that those of you who don't really want to do this are probably the people who really need to. Because we all have emotions. We all have them. We all navigate them. And learning how to navigate them well in a healthy, God-honoring way, we all really, really need that. Now, all of us grew up different. All of us grew up differently. And I'm learning to acknowledge that we all heard things different as kids. And some of us more than others have retained this idea that there's 2 ways to go when it comes to your feeling, the right way and the wrong way. Some of you already know what I'm talking about. There's the way you should feel, and then there's the way you shouldn't feel. And I mean, I got a handful of kids at home, and I'm telling you, they all hear things differently. And you say something and it glances off of some of them, and others, they take it really deep. Think about a few weeks ago, we had that big rainstorm, the lightning, and the power went out for a few minutes, and I know I told that story. I was walking up the stairs, and the lights went out, and then I heard like little cries from all over the house, ah! Because that was a fearful moment. Thinking about this, I remember scooping one up, and I'm like, calm down, and I'm holding it. I'm saying this. Hey, don't worry. Hey, don't be scared. And you know what was in my heart in that moment? I was just trying to calm my kid down and let him know there's more than just darkness. There are people, there's safety, there's all that stuff. But some of us as kids heard that, and someone said, hey, don't be scared. And they go, okay. Like, okay, flip the switch. Not scared now. Like, what are you expecting me to do? Hey, don't be scared. Or you heard this, hey, don't be sad. Or you like, have you got this one recently? Hey, don't worry about it. Don't get all emotional about this. We have this way of retaining that there's a right and wrong way, and we know what the right answer is, and then we know what the wrong answer is, or maybe the answer that is going to be least burdensome to the people around us, and we just try to skip to the right answer more often than not, which means that whether or not I feel okay, whether or not I'm feeling great, whether or not I'm feeling blessed, we just say, I'm fine. And often what this does is it leads us to start going numb on ourselves. Sometimes we've got really good intentions. We're just trying not to be selfish, okay? But other times, and I want you to hear this, other times it's a product of us having believed a lie that Christians don't have a choice on what we feel and we don't feel. And when we routinely cover over our feelings, we're on our way to becoming a plastic person, which I can assure you is the opposite direction of where God is leading us. It's the opposite result of when God puts his eternal, real, unconquerable life in little lives like ours. So, stepping onto the path of becoming a plastic person, is that dangerous? I would say absolutely yes. I want to introduce you to a guy. His name is Peter Scazzero. He has a story. He was a pastor and a successful church planner in New York City, planted a church. It worked. He was there for over 25 years. And after over 25 years of pastoring, his testimony is this. He said, eventually, on the inside, I found myself in a crisis. I was a successful pastor. My leadership influence was on the rise. It was growing. But my inner life with God was nearly non-existent. I knew I was in a dangerous place. He said, I almost lost everything. And so Peter Scazzero went on that journey. He dug in, he dug down, he got the help he needed, and it eventually led him and his wife to found the Center of Emotional Health and Spirituality. It's a very interesting story. He's written a host of books, and I want to read you a few quotes from his books. You know that he's got skin in the game, and I'm going to read them as slowly as I hope that you will hear them, because these ideas are not only true and biblical, but foundational to the series that we're starting today. You ready? Scazzero writes, ignoring our emotions is turning our back on reality. However, listening to our emotions ushers us into reality. And reality is where we meet God. He goes on to write, emotions are the language of the soul. They are the cry that gives the heart a a voice. And here's the big one. Emotional health and spiritual maturity are inseparable. It is not possible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. Did you hear that? That if you want to block future spiritual growth, then by all means remain emotionally unwell. That is what makes a conversation about emotions critical. That's why this conversation is happening at all 3 of our locations starting today. We're excited about what God will do. He's going to help lead us toward his purposes in our lives as he works on us as individuals, us as a family. And this week, I thought we would start off by looking at Jesus and looking at how Jesus handled his emotions here on earth, especially in a highly, highly emotional time. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Grab the Bible you brought in, or the one you're going to borrow from us, or the one that's on your phone. Find it. We're looking. Find with me Matthew chapter 26. Matthew is the first book of the New Testament. It is the first of 4 accounts of the life and times of Jesus that we have in Scripture. Matthew and Mark and Luke and John all did us a solid. And Matthew 26 is where we'll be, but we're going to read something that the other guys all refer to as well, so we'll be able to make use of that. And while you're turning to Matthew 26 so that you can see this for yourself, I will paint you the picture of what has culminated in Jesus' life. Jesus is in a super emotional time. And right there, out of the box, there are people in this room that are already learning. And you're like, Jesus? Like, had emotions? Yeah. He did. Well, it's like, well, I don't know. I just kind of picture Jesus as a guy who always spoke in the same soft tone to everybody and had long blinks while he did it. And every once in a while, he's put his finger in the air and a bird would land on it as he spoke. And I mean, yes. See, here's the deal. Jesus, being God, became human. And you're like, well, I don't know. I guess I never came from a place where emotions had anything to do with faith. Emotions have everything to do with faith because emotions have everything to do with being human. And faith is what every human needs. In fact, if I can tell you that one study showed that as you read through the Gospels, their conclusion is that Jesus experienced 39 different emotions as you read through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. 39, which if you don't have a teenage girl in your house, you had no idea that there were like 39 ways to feel about anything. But that's the deal. Jesus, delight, sadness, anger, joy, so many emotions. It's right there. It's part of his experience. And here in Matthew 26, Jesus had just so many high emotions and so many emotions just stirring. We know about this moment from like John 13, that Jesus was fully aware in this moment that the fulfillment of God's plan was near. He has been here for about 33 years, and he is close to leaving. His departure will come via a crucifixion. There's going to be bloodshed. He's going to suffer like no one else has. He's going to endure the worst that mankind has to offer. All of hell is going to use that moment to open up every cannon it's got pointed straight at Jesus. Jesus knows that is coming. And he's hanging out with his disciples, his posse, for like 3 years. They followed him around. They learned to do ministry from him. He chose them. Closest relationships he has on earth. One of those disciples has already left the room. He's out in a secret meeting, planning on how he's going to betray Jesus. There's a plot unfolding right now to haul Jesus away in handcuffs. He knows that. The mood in the room is weird. The disciples have been arguing about a lady, about a woman who sacrificed this incredibly expensive perfume to pour it over Jesus in a personal yet ceremonial way to express her appreciation and her conviction that Jesus is the Messiah, that Jesus is the chosen one. A beautiful moment that was hard to enjoy when all the disciples could see and murmur about was the expense that was involved. Why'd you do? Which is great. It just implies to Jesus, you're not worth that. And Jesus, as clumsy as those guys may be, he finds himself about to share a Passover meal with them. This is his last holiday with his homies. This is his last dinner with them. And in all of this, with all of this swirling, Jesus knows that very soon it's all going to hit the fan. Like, remember the moments you've been in where you're just sitting there waiting for a bomb to go off? You're waiting for a gunshot to go off. You remember what was inside of you? That's what's inside of Jesus. It's all going to hit the fan real fast, and all those disciples are going to go find themselves lost. They're going to run and hide and act like they never knew him. He's going to be all alone. Is that enough emotion? And where we pick up in Jesus' story, chapter 26, verse 36, you see it? We know that Jesus just had to be fully emotionally consumed. It says this: Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane. It's a garden. And he said to them, sit here while I go over there and pray. It's nighttime, by the way. And as he went, he took Peter and he took the two sons of Zebedee, that's James and John. So he takes Peter, James, and John along with him. And he began to be sorrowful and troubled. And he said to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. And going a little further, Jesus fell with his face to the ground and he prayed. Father, if it's possible, may this cup, or may this responsibility be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will. Everything is just so weird right now. I mean, he just told Dad, I know why I came, but I'd like to not do it. I'd like another way. Yeah, everything is just so weird right now. This is what Matthew wrote down for us. Now, the writer of this same scene in the Gospel of Luke gives us an additional added perspective because Luke, we know from history, is a medical doctor, and he describes the physical symptoms Jesus was experiencing in this moment. In Luke 22:44, it says, and being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. Now, I want you to know that this is not Luke writing poetically, or he's not writing in hyperbole. This is a medical moment. It's called hematohidrosis, where when a person is under such extreme conditions, the blood capillaries literally break and the blood mixes with sweat, and what comes out of the pores is this blood-sweat combination. The point here, do you feel that we've established this? Jesus is in an incredibly emotional, overwhelmed moment. Now, if we put everything together that we've talked about today, then we have to admit that this would be a moment where some Christians would have gone up to Jesus and tried to counsel him out of it, right? Jesus says, hey, my soul is overwhelmed to the point of death. And then what do? I don't feel that way, Jesus. Don't feel that way. God. And then these verse-sounding phrases start coming out of the mouths of our dearest friends. They say things like, oh, Jesus, God gives his toughest battles to his greatest warriors, or something like that. It's like, no, that's not in the Bible. Or you ever heard this one? God won't give you any more than you can handle. Not a verse. Chin up, Jesus. Look on the bright side. I know that only good will come from this. Can't you feel the positive vibes that I'm sending you, Jesus? Like, we have this way of trying to just kind of move people through these moments. Now, I just, for a second, stay here for a second. I hope that as we read about an emotional time in Jesus' life, it sets a few people in this room free. Free to know that even though people have put this pressure on me in the past, well-meaning people, good-intentioned people, to realize that they've put a pressure on us to be happy in a moment where, in fact, we just aren't. You might have walked in this room today maybe feeling overwhelmed even to the point of death. And I just want you to know something about Jesus. I want you to know it. You listening? Jesus does not say to you, don't feel that way. Jesus does not say to you, don't feel that way. Jesus says, oh man, I know exactly how you feel. Oh, I've had moments like that. You got to know this about Jesus. I want to show you in verse in Hebrews. Put it on the screen. It says, this high priest of ours, talking about Jesus, this high priest of ours understands our weaknesses, for he faced all the same testings that we do. Little note about the book of Hebrews, written by a guy who does a masterful job of connecting all the realities of the Old Testament into the New Testament, how the life of Jesus fulfills all of the requirements of the Old Testament. And in the Old Testament, there was a guy. He was the high priest. He was pretty important. He was the go-to guy of the people. He was a mediator. He was a single chosen, they rotated, but like a single chosen person to lead the people into fellowship with God. He had to be righteous. He had to meet all the qualifications. Had to be a stand-up dude in ways that we don't even have time to detail right now. The go-to guy was the one that led people into fellowship with Jesus, but that person has to also be one of the people. He has to intuitively understand their hurts and their habits and their hang-ups. He's got to get that. Why does the writer of Hebrews call Jesus our high priest? He does it because Jesus fully understands every inch of the human experience that we have. In fact, he's going to go on to say he's our eternal high priest. Nobody's ever going to do a better job, and we'll never need anybody else besides Jesus. And maybe for a lot of us today, getting this part of our theology corrected, that Jesus doesn't just love you, Jesus understands you. Maybe correcting this part of our theology will completely change how we process our emotions and our feelings. Something I really like about this church is that it's a multi-generational, multicultural faith family. I love that there are so many people with different perspectives than me, different families from mine. We have people of different ages. We have people of different ethnicities, people of different experiences. And what it means is that it reminds us that every one of us was raised differently. When it comes to emotions, I think a lot of us, if you follow generations, like generationally speaking, a lot of us were raised to avoid talking about our feelings, right? Like we were raised, coached out of demonstrating certain emotions. And there are people in this room who copied that behavior and kind of just brought that into your generation. And then there are others of us who sort of split from that. And we sort of swung in a different direction. And what it does is it starts to create a spectrum for you and I today as we have this intentional conversation about emotions. It creates the spectrum on how we can process our emotions, the number of ways, the variety of ways where we handle the feelings that we have. So I brought two chairs up here just to kind of illustrate. Let me just paint a picture of like one extreme here. And then here, this can be like our other extreme, okay? And if you were raised to live in a camp of, let's call it emotional avoidance. Anybody already know that that's them? The camp of emotional avoidance means that you were taught mind over matter. You were taught you keep a stiff upper lip. You were taught that feelings they're frivolous, they're extra, they're unproductive. So stuff those bad boys down. Like a trash compactor that nobody changes. You stuff them down. And I just want to assure you something. That stuff comes up. That stuff comes up. It comes back. It catches up to you. And you can stuff it down. You can stuff. Emotional avoidance always, it comes back. It comes to surface. And it might not always come back in words. It might not come back in tears. But it'll come back. And it can come back in angry, confusing outbursts, unpredictable reactions. It can come back in the form of addictions. It can come back in so many different ways. Where does all this stuff that I do that I don't understand come from? Emotional avoidance. Then you might find yourself sometimes hanging out on this other extreme here. For you, it's not emotional avoidance, it's emotional indulgence. Ouch, right? And this is where we say, oh, feel those feelings. Don't just feel them, like put them in a pile and roll around in them. Like those emotional indulgence will say, hey, feel those feelings, because listen, and this is where it goes. Whatever you feel is right. Whatever you feel is good for you. You're uncovering yourself. And it comes to a point where we end up finding our identity in the things that we feel. Finding our identity in our momentary desires, even coming to a point where our moral compass is dictated by our feelings. Because we're just thinking, look, if I feel it, that must be the direction. It must be the way I'm supposed to go. Because my feelings must trump everything else. And we even start saying things to other people. Well, this is how I felt, so deal with it. In other words, if on that extreme, emotions are garbage, over on this extreme, emotions are God. And I know that if you're relating more to this chair, you don't like how I just said that. But that is exactly what we just described. And furthermore, folks who tend to live on this end tend to allow our feelings to set the temperature for all of our relationships and everybody around us. Now, this is the exciting thing, is as we study a Bible, we tend to discover something different. We can tend to discover that God has a way to show us how to mature through everything that we feel. And my hope today even, and over the course of this series, is as we allow the most powerful book ever written to mankind, the most reliable book that we have ever had, the most humanly transparent book that we've ever been given, it's going to set a course of God helping us realize how we can grow, how we can develop, or another word, how we can mature. There are folks who tend to live on this extreme over here that need to learn something, that emotions are not garbage, emotions are good. How did you come to exist? Who designed you? You have a creator. He owns the blueprint on you. He hardwired into the human experience the ability to feel. Emotions are good. They are on purpose. He had a purpose when he gave that to you. He has a purpose. It wasn't a mistake. And what we got to do is acknowledge that what God has put in us is the capacity to feel. Folks that live on this end extreme need to come to an awareness that emotions were meant to be your gauge, not your God. Emotions are, I don't know, sometimes we really don't like this, but emotions are incredibly useful for getting our attention. They alert us that there's an issue, and they start moving us in a better direction. Yeah? But they're not worth the pedestal that we often try to put them on. So here's what we get to do now. Let's go back to Jesus. Jesus wants to make us look more like him. Let's see how he rolled. Go back to Matthew 26. Let's go back to our go-to guy and watch him deal in an emotionally intense time. Because if we'll look, we will see Jesus modeling for us how to acknowledge those emotions and then release them to God in order that they might be 100% redemptive. And this might help begin to, help us deal with our emotions in a healthy, in a God-honoring way. So I want you to go back to that passage, and I want to point out not one, just two things. Can you look at two things with me? The first thing that I want you to see is that Jesus tells his friends how he's feeling and asks for support. You see that? Did you notice that? Jesus tells his friends how he's feeling, and he asks for support. Here's the line I'm getting this from. Jesus said, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." And don't miss this. Jesus was vulnerable with some of his closest friends. Never confuse weakness with vulnerability. Weakness, we all got. You're human, you have weakness. It's coming for you. You already got it. You already know. Vulnerability is when you choose to be strong about your weakness. It's totally different. People who know how to be vulnerable have decided, I'm not going to be stupid about the weakness that I have and that we all have. Vulnerability is when we're being strong about our weakness. Now, the fuller picture here is that Jesus doesn't share his vulnerability with all of his disciples. Did you notice that? He didn't decide to record his emotional breakdown and put it on the internet. He didn't cast this wide sympathy net, see who he could catch. I mean, let's just be honest. The point of this series is not to make us all into people that just, blurt out every time, every emotion and every feeling every time somebody in the lobby or somebody at the grocery store says, "Hey, how you doing?" That's not the goal here. That's not healthy for anybody, but there should be a few people in your life with whom you can be vulnerable and honest. The trouble often sets in when we think that everybody we know is supposed to be in our top 3. And we start developing these unhealthy expectations of all people and all friendships and all relationships, and what that often just produces is more hard emotions. So we got to back off of that, and we got to get back to Jesus, who modeled courage. He modeled strength and wisdom, not by avoiding his emotions and dominating other people with his emotions. He modeled it by choosing to be honest about how he felt and making sure he was not alone in that. Jesus knows better than we do. Choose to isolate. Man, those are the times in your life where Satan just starts rubbing his hands together. So the first thing we notice here is that Jesus was honest about how he felt. He chose not to be alone. Here's the second thing I want you to notice. He prioritizes his faith over his feelings. The line I'm getting that from is verse 39. You see it there? He says, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will." As another way to say it, he subjects his feelings under the jurisdiction of what God clearly wants for his life. He's aligning his heart with what he knows is true. Feelings and awe. What a fresh thought this was for me, just preparing to be with you today and realizing that's the moment that my Lord first started to shed blood for me. is when he's kneeling there in the dirt, feeling what he's feeling. He's being honest about it, and yet he's still collaring those feelings. He's strong-arming them into words. He acknowledges them to his Father, and then he concludes with, "Not my will, but yours be done." Feelings, you get in line. This is what's going down. He says, "God, I want to be honest, but this is what I'm feeling, but my pain is not going to dictate my decisions. My confusion, not going to dictate my decisions. What I feel right now is not what matters the most. It's what you want. That's what matters the most." And when it comes to acknowledging how we feel and finding other people to be with us in that, I mean, that's a word for us, right? If we're emotional avoiders. But this one here really is a word for us who tend to live on the emotional indulgence camp, right? Because we've been taught, hey man, you do you. Like, feel those feelings, follow your heart wherever it may lead. That's emotional indulgence, and that's just not the example that Jesus sets for us as followers of Christ. He never fakes what he feels, but our feelings should always end in surrender. It's, God, whatever you want, that's what I want. Doesn't matter how I feel about it, your will be done, not mine. And maybe you needed to hear that today, that you may feel right now like, you may feel today, this afternoon, that you want to lose your temper. You may feel that way. You may feel like procrastinating again. You may feel like avoiding certain people. You might feel lonely where you are in life and you're wanting to entertain other options that will make you feel something else than what you feel right now. You might feel like abandoning God's design for your life because the feeling is that, man, God must want me to feel differently than the way I feel right now. And I want to promise you something. I'm not standing up here telling you, hey, don't feel that. Feel this. What I do want to say is, all right, so that's the way you feel. Where are those feelings going to take you? Where's it going to end up if we let those feelings drive the train? Because if it's taking you to a place that's not Jesus making you look more like Jesus, then I can pretty well promise you where it is going to take you, where it is going to take me, is a place of being even more overwhelmed with worse options. It's going to take you to a place where God never designed for you to be. It's going to take you to a place that God didn't create for you to be. Something we all needed to be reminded of is this, is that what you feel is real. Just because it's real doesn't make it true. You might feel lonely, and that's a real feeling, but especially if you are a follower of Jesus and you are in the family of God, it's not true. You're not alone. You may feel like you've been abandoned. You may feel like the desires of your heart are super confusing, super unmet. You may feel empty. You may feel overwhelmed even to the point of death, and you really can't come up with a reason to go on any longer. That may absolutely be the way you feel, but it is not true. Because the truer truth is this. Said you were created by God on purpose. You were created by God for a great purpose. And God knows the details. And he wants to put back the broken pieces in your heart so he can recreate you in Christ and do something beautiful and brand new with the mess that you currently have on your hands. And you're never going to experience it by burying whatever emotions come your way. Never going to experience it by isolating, doing life on your terms. Continue to make life all about you. The only way that you and I will experience the new thing that God is going to victoriously do in your life is when you surrender it all and come to this place where you say, but God, not my will, but yours be done. I want to wrap us up this way. I want to help us focus one more time on the thing that Jesus became for us after that tough moment in the Garden of Gethsemane. After that moment where he shed the rest of his blood, after the cross, after he was killed and buried, and then had this 3-day stay in the grave and then checked out early. It's that line that we looked at a few minutes ago from the book of Hebrews. I want to look at that one more time. It's a great line. He says, this high priest of ours understands your weaknesses, my weaknesses, for he faced all of the same testings that we do. And then the writer goes on to point this out. Yet he did not sin. This is why we follow Jesus, folks. He mastered the balance that we tend to foul up. Jesus perfectly, he managed the tension where you and I often slide into extremes. We hurt ourselves, we hurt other people, we dent our reputation, we store up regret, we gotta go, all that stuff. Jesus mastered that. He experienced all of our weaknesses, yet he did not sin. And then it says this, so let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. There we will receive his mercy. Isn't that what we overwhelmed people have been waiting for someone to give a real sense of? There we will receive his mercy and we will find grace to help us when we need it most. So I think we all have a step to take this morning. Let's do this. Let's just pray right now. Head bowed, eyes closed. I say that to encourage you to have a personal meeting with the very real Jesus right now. Jesus, teach us to acknowledge all of our feelings, even the unsightly ones, the unpermitted ones. We stand with you today and say they are not garbage. Jesus, we want your help demoting the influence of feelings in our lives. They are not God. They are not you. And today we come forward to you, to your throne, in your light, believing that there's a truckload of mercy and grace to help us with whatever we need right now. Thank you that in your mercy and grace, you can help us understand ourselves and feel understood by you. Thank you in your great mercy and grace, you can help us become strong enough to be vulnerable and to put our deepest feelings into words. Thank you that by your mercy and grace, you can help us deal with regret. You can help us stay the course that we know that you have set for us. And right now, God, we surrender ourselves to you. As Jesus surrendered, we surrender. We make you the God of our choices, no matter how we feel. And this is special for somebody in the room today that you would raise your hand and say, look, this is the first conversation like this I've ever had with Jesus. It's the first time I've ever come to him and just asked him to be the boss of my heart. Let me give you some words that the Bible says truly makes the connection. You would say this, Jesus, I admit that I'm a sinner. You're on a throne. I ain't got a throne. Eternally, I'm coming to you. And I don't have a great explanation of how I lived my life. I'm pretty broken. I'm pretty stained up and dirty. I've made a lot of bad decisions, and I'm coming to believe that sin will separate me from you. And I'm hearing that you have a plan for me, that you died on a cross for me, that you went through it all for me so that I could be scrubbed clean, I could be forgiven because you took my sin and you're offering me your righteous standing in heaven with God, and I accept that. that free gift that starts now in my heart and lasts through eternity. Father, I want you to be my dad. I want to join your family. And I'm deciding right now to trust you more than I trust me. And I just want to say thank you. You know what you're getting into. And if you're in, I'm in. And it's in your name I pray, Jesus.